Hey, everybody. Welcome. Wow, we have a change. The world has changed. Most of you thought we were going to be, and now, Marissa, I think you can maybe connect this thing back to the LinkedIn event. I hope. I think. I'll see if you can use your magic to figure that part out. But we're at least here, and I think people are going to be joining us from both YouTube and LinkedIn because we had a problem with our other technology. And so, Jennifer, we've been at this all week. We've had like zero problems until right now. Yes. So welcome those of you that are here, and welcome those of you that might join us later. I'm here with Jennifer Moss, and what we're doing is doing the next session in virtual LeaderCon, and we're also, hopefully, creating an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast with Jennifer Moss as my guest. She's the author of this marvelous book. We're going to talk about that in a second. But first, let me introduce her to you. Jennifer Moss is an award-winning journalist, international public speaker, and the author of The Burnout Epidemic, The Rise of Chronic Stress, and How We Can Fix It. And guess what? It comes out next Tuesday.
So excited.
How awesome is that? She's a nationally syndicated radio columnist, reporting on topics related to happiness and workplace well-being. She's also a freelance writer. She has articles in the Huffington Post, Forbes, and SHRM, Fortune, HBR. Her previous book, Unlocking Happiness at Work, received the distinguished UK Business Book of the Year award. She sits on the Get This Global Happiness Council. To acknowledge her contributions to business and public service, Moss was named a Canadian Innovator of the Year, an International Female Entrepreneur of the Year, and recipient of the Public Service Award from the Office of President Obama. So I count 3 countries there that have awarded you in one way or the other. It's pretty awesome. And
Thank you.
And while it won't make the list, now you're a guest on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast and Virtual LeaderCon. Thank you, Jennifer.
I'm so happy to be here. It's going to be great. I loved our discussion earlier, so I'm glad that we're able to extend it.
Me too. So, all right. I'm just going to dive right in. This isn't going to be as pretty as they normally are when I'm on LinkedIn with lower thirds and all that stuff. But all of you, I can see your comments. Here's the question. Why is this an epidemic?
It's an epidemic because it's been a problem across the globe for decades, probably longer. You know, I joke in the book, maybe not a joke, but really that, it started with the pyramids, the fact that the royalty lived about 3 times as long because they didn't have to do any of the work. I mean, we really have been seeing this rise of overwork, and it's been impactful. And it was in 2019, pre-pandemic, that the World Health Organization actually identified it as a workplace phenomena, and that it was worthy enough of including in their IDC-11, their International Classification of Diseases, because people were dying from overwork. So I think, there's catastrophic effects. We've sort of been downplaying it for a long time, but now we see it in every part of the world, impacting people, and particularly now that we've gone through this pandemic.
Okay, so you just said that I said, why is there a burnout epidemic? And you're talking about overwork, but there's more to this than just work, right? There's more reasons that we have it. There's more causes, right? Before we can talk about fixing it, we gotta recognize that it exists. You just told us that. Yeah. I mean, it's classified as a disease, everybody. So if you didn't realize it was serious, it's serious. So then we've got to think about what are the causes, right? So that's the question. What are the causes of it?
Well, and I have to backtrack because the International Classification of Diseases didn't go so far to say that it's actually a disease, but that it's a syndrome. And so I want to just put that there because it should be. In Sweden, it's considered something that is treatable. It's a mental illness, but it's the only country in the world, of course, it's in Sweden, that they would identify that. But, we have a lot of causes that are impacting it, from systemic discrimination to lack of fairness to lack of agency, being micromanaged. We saw that a lot this year. I mean,
let's slow down because people are taking notes. First of all, but second of all, in the book, you really talk about 6 major causes, and you started rolling through those. But let's sort of bullet them out a little bit more, and then we can maybe unpack a couple of them. Okay, so 6 major areas of cause. You started to lay them out, but I think people are going to want to really have a chance to think about them. And really, here's what I want you to do, everybody, while you're listening. And you don't have to answer in the chat, your answer. But I want you to think about the 6 causes, and I want you to think about which ones are mine, which are the ones that are impacting me, right? That's what I want you to think about as Jennifer's sort of unpacking this for us. So with that, what are the 6 causes of burnout?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad that we're spending some time addressing them one by one, because it's important to understand that burnout is not something that can be solved with self-care alone. It's good to optimize and to care about ourselves. It's also part of the solution. But when you look at the root causes, the 6 of them, they're pretty macro, and there's systemic issues like workload and cultures of overwork are sort of legacy inside of lots of organizations like tech and finance and healthcare and teaching. And so we see that almost like it pulls people in that have these high performing mindsets, and then they overwork. We're seeing this too in certain roles and industries in China and Japan. There's actually a term for death by overwork in Japan called karoshi. So it's a systemic problem that's causing a lot of issues. And that's just happening now, where we're working in the pandemic about 30% more per day. We have 24% more meetings. In North America, we're looking at working about 2 to 4 more hours a day. So
I'm laughing. I'm not laughing because that's funny. But the number of times I've had clients say, I've never been in more meetings. I didn't think it was possible to be in more meetings, and now in more meetings than ever before. So I think that you said, what did you say, 20 or 24%? That might be low, right? At least in terms of, in all seriousness.
Yes.
And the good news is, for those of you who have been in virtual LeaderCon all week, virtualleadercon.com, you can still join us if you're with us live here. We've talked a lot about the fact that, do we need that meeting, or how else can we get to that outcome without a meeting and a bunch of stuff related to that, which can start to help with this workload scenario? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that plays a big role in us being able to mitigate issues of workload, is just reducing that amount of meeting fatigue, which was a problem before. I mean, we had way too many meetings before. It was a huge issue, and we wasted a ton of money and time on meetings. And now we're just doing it, exponentially more, and all virtually, which is exhausting. But workload is one, and is the leading cause. And, that's why we tackle it the most, because it is a leading cause. It was pre-pandemic. It is now in the pandemic, and probably will be forever, just because of that legacy that we have, that working really hard and so many hours means you're more productive, which is not true. So we have that. You have lack of agency, which is essentially not having choice where, how, when you hit your goals, feeling like every single effort that you make or action you take at work is being measured or monitored. We're seeing the increase of bossware, that where people are starting to watch, you while you're working. That's just exponentially risen. And that lack of agency.
Surely now that's starting to go back. I know what had happened when we first went into the pandemic. Like, I know that happened. Surely people have figured out the error of those ways, but perhaps not.
No, the amount of bossware that has come into people's, or monitorware, the people that has come into people's workplaces has dramatically increased. I mean, there's just so much more of it on the market, and so much more usage of it to monitor what people are doing. And that's just so wrong. I don't understand how we think that that's appropriate, but that leads to lack of agency. And when we don't have any choice, and especially if we're in a marginalized group, that in society, we feel like we don't have a lot of choice. We feel like we're highly controlled in our choices because of systemic discrimination and those other things going on in the macro society. Then when we go into work, and then we feel like we have no choice there, it predicts risk, that risk of burnout. We also see.
So we're two in, right? That's 2, but there's a question that came in that's connected to the first 2.
Workload, lack of agency.
How do we shut it off? And the question might have come in when we were still talking about the workload, but I think it actually relates a lot to the second one, which is you have the control perhaps to turn it off. So, but Daniel's question is, how do you recommend shutting off time for yourself?
It's challenging for people that are high performing, and if they're in a culture of overwork and they feel like that's not a place that they can take that space. But it's consequential. Right now, we're in 20 months in, and we are working like we're still in an emergency. And emergency, by definition, is unexpected. This isn't unexpected anymore. This is endemic. And So we have to start thinking sustainably about how we're going to survive and compete and be productive and engaged in our jobs, from now until we retire. And we're not going to do that unless we're able to take that space. The leaders in particular need to model the behavior, because we all see this, we all hear about this in other areas of business, but employees can't be what they can't see. So we need to be really good at modeling, and we need to be taking time away from our digital devices. We shouldn't be answering emails on our vacation. We should be taking vacations as leaders. We need to have boundaries. It's no longer work-life balance. It's like work-life boundaries. And I think we need to be thinking more about how do we instill these spaces of time that are protected, because we are going to create an obsolete workforce, because there's no way that we can sustain this pressure and this dealing with such a massive crisis, this macro stressor, while we have all these micro stressors happening at work. So we need to focus on that as a priority.
William says 7-7 rule, no emails after 7 p.m. before 7 a.m. So there's an example of what that might look like. And you made the huge point about the role of the leader in it, because I, as a leader, if I send an email to someone at 7:10, then they might look at it, and maybe I didn't want them to, but it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Right? Doesn't matter. They watch my fingers and my feet more than my lips, Jennifer. I'm just saying. All right. Workload's a cause. Perceived lack of control or agency is a cause. What's cause number 3?
And then there's lack of community. So loneliness, people feeling like they're isolated and lonely. In the data that we gathered this year, I did have the privilege of working with Dr. Maslock and Dr. Michael Leiter, who are the foremost experts in burnout. And we surveyed people across 46 different countries. We asked a couple open-ended questions. We got a lot of qualitative feedback back to us, which was excellent, because it really described in their words how people were feeling. A lot of people felt like especially our younger workforce, started work inside the pandemic, had no relationships, fundamental sort of foundational relationships with their team. So they felt like they used words like, my career's being held back, I don't feel connected to anyone. Those are the types of issues that they're dealing with, because we have moved further into single occupancy dwellings just by, just over the last 20 years anyways. There's less multi-generational families together. And when we looked at that data, the people living alone without kids were the ones that were actually the most unwell, the sickest, the most burnt out. And so when you have that and you don't have relationships at work, because we're in this, socially isolated environment, it's really impacted the workforce. And there's a lot of people burning out, especially our younger workforce, who feels like that they have to take on the extra load for their, sort of struggling, juggling parents that are on the team. And yes, parents are really impacted, but we're not seeing the loneliness piece as being a high risk of burnout as well as workload.
The thing that I've been saying for a long time is we had an epidemic of loneliness before we had a pandemic of the COVID, and obviously we had an epidemic of burnout before this, and both the loneliness one and the burnout one have both grown, right?
They have. I mean, this crisis just exacerbated all those existing problems, but really blew up the loneliness piece because of the way that we had to work. The isolation, even just people being in the office, describe it being different in that, there's a difference in shaking hands, and sometimes you have to be on at different times than other people because it's been, it's the way that it's been set up for safety. We want safety to be number one, but we have to integrate mental health supports as well to understand that that's hard for a lot of people, especially people that get fueled by others, that like to be around each other. They're really feeling disconnected right now.
Man, that is so true. There's a comment that came in this particular case. I believe it was on YouTube. And it says, I have a colleague, and I'm going to make a comment, and then you can add to it if you want. I have a colleague who signs emails with, I'm sending this email at a time convenient for me. Please respond at a time convenient for you for your workday. That's great as far as it goes, unless you're the boss. If you're the boss, it doesn't matter. You've got to learn that you have a button that says delay delivery. And you better be delaying it, because it doesn't, you can say that and it's certainly better than not. And as a peer, perhaps that's fine, but we still don't know how that's landing. Like, I love the sentiment, but I don't know that it's going to solve the problem.
I think, Kevin, you nailed it on the head. It's these ways of behaving that, are sort of filled with privilege. And I don't want to say that that's, that's in this case, that's your coworker or colleague's situation. It's just when we are the boss, or when we're in a place where we don't have to worry about that as much, we don't know how it's landing with other people. It's kind of like, we're giving a week off to our burned out employees. Well, you're missing the point. They're burned out and you're giving them a week off, but it's because you burned them out. So what do you think is going to change when they go back? They're not going to go back to an environment where all of a sudden their workload's being managed for them. You're putting them right back into the fire. So you're just,
and guess what they're saying? I got a week's worth of email. Right. We had a guest on earlier this week at Virtual LeaderCon that said the companies, listen, when you leave, you are expected to and celebrated when you delete all the email. And when you come back to email 0 and then start again. And that would change a lot for lots of people. We don't have time to unpack that because you've got 3 more causes by my count that you still need to talk about.
Yes. So then there's, the 3 already. And then there's lack of fairness. So that's where the discrimination piece comes in, making sure that we are things like, these are big macro problems when we're looking at, gender equality and pay equality. Some, folks at the World Health Organization are saying it's going to, to fix the pay gap, it's going to take till 292 or something ridiculous like that. I mean, that is a big thing that needs to be solved already, but we inside of our organizations can be auditing and making sure that there's, equality across the line. We also should be looking at things like maternity and paternity leaves. Hewlett Packard does a really good job, and there's others too, like IBM and others, that really do this flattening. If it's time off for family planning, each person, no matter of their gender, gets the equal amount of time off, and they can choose it as they want to, but then it just doesn't place the responsibility on the female to make the choices around family planning if they want to share that with their spouse. I mean, that kind of changes the dynamic, and we need to be, thinking like that in those ways that you can actually make changes in your organization through these simple policies. And they can reduce, gender inequality and some of these other, issues around systemic discrimination. We need to make sure that our diversity inclusion is actually getting, those strategies are getting at the root of the problem and not just, Band-Aid at sort of as a way to take care of it when it's too late.
I love that. I think there's one more we haven't talked about. Maybe there's 2, but I know there's one for sure. We haven't really talked about the values mismatch.
So there's 2 more. One of them is values and skills mismatch. So you have the values mismatch. And one of the things that we've seen this year across the board is that because people are so overwhelmed, their sensory, and their sort of mental sensory is so deprived right now that we're feeling completely stimulated. We're in back-to-back meetings. Teachers, for example, I love that you just did that, Kevin. You're amazing. They've been finding that the thing that they loved about their job, like the thing that gave them inspiration or where they were connected to, is being lost kind of, with the meetings and the emails and the always on and the, that virtual relationship. Like teachers aren't connecting to the students. It's better now that they're back in school in many places, but we're also seeing just in general, people going, I don't feel effective. What's my value? I'm not connected to the mission of my job anymore. And it's because they're burned out. There's
another psychological phenomenon that goes on, and that is when our perspective is impacted by our surroundings. So if my surroundings is the north end of my dining room table, or the end of my bed, or an office in my house, whatever it is, that's what I see. And the longer that happens, the shorter my view comes and the more insular my view becomes. I'm not walking into the building and seeing the name on the front of the building. I'm not seeing other people. I'm not seeing people wearing a jacket that's got the name of the company on it. I'm not seeing metrics on monitors in hallways. And so it's harder for me, literally, to be connected to that meaning and that purpose and that bigger idea. So as leaders, we've got to keep people mindful and reminding all of that. Super, super important.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because when we look at just, Gallup's data around friends at work, one friend at work can reduce burnout by 41%. And we're atrophying. I mean, we're by nature as humans, part of our survival is to be part of a tribe. And the fact that we are missing that sense of having a tribe, which a lot of us would get at work. We spend 50% of our waking hours at work. So, you have to imagine that those people there are meaningful to us. And, I keep saying that hybrid is great as long as you have people in the office at the same time and out of this office at the same time. If it's fully remote, spend the money that now that you don't have to pay on commercial real estate, spend it on getting people together in the office at least once a quarter, spend money on getting your team to actually be with each other. And then if you're in the office full time, understand that people also get exhausted by that. So making sure that there is opportunity for flexibility for those folks too. Like, I think getting to that point where we have swung the pendulum really far in one direction, and the goal should be putting it back in the middle, not where it was before, because you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, but somewhere in that middle zone. And I think that's where people will feel, in a state of healthiness, because as a workplace expert, I've long been advocating for flexibility, somewhere where we meet in that sweet spot. And I think that's what we intentionally need to get to.
The comment that what you don't know, and of course, anyone who might be listening to this, if this actually becomes a podcast and we don't redo it to make it better, is that there's, as a leader, we have to be focused on both outcomes and others, right? And we've got to make sure that we got the combination of both of those things, and we can get there with flexibility if we'll open our eyes and think about it. William is asking you a question that says there used to be a say. No, he asked a question earlier. What happens? It's scrolling away from me. He said, what happens when an employee stands up for their boundaries and says, this is not okay?
Well, I think we're a long way away from people feeling completely destigmatized in the workplace, which is unfortunate. But I do think there's some silver linings that did come out of this last year, where mental health conversations at work are becoming much more open. We're seeing, leaders in high positions coming out and saying, I've been impacted, or this is what's happened with my mental health. And even just senior executives inside of organizations saying, this is an exhausting year for me, because collectively we've gone through it. But there's still a ton of stigma inside of organizations. There's a culture where we're not supposed to talk about these things. And that's where I talk about burnout solutions as being a we problem to solve, an ecosystem where organizations and leadership need to be highly involved in this. And then we are, we get to a point where we can create some trust, where it's not complete learned helplessness and we think there's no change, or there's no, it's not entirely cynical where we can't do anything about it. We have a role to play. We can develop our resiliency and our psychological fitness, but organizations need to make it safe for us to be able to do that. It has to be at all sides. We're never going to fix burnout if it isn't a shared approach.
The organization, the individual, and the leader that sits in the middle of that, it's all of us. It belongs to all of us. I love that word ecosystem in this context so very much. So we talked about the causes, and we've talked, as we walk through the causes, I don't think, did we talk about lack of recognition and reward yet?
No, that's another big
cause number 6, everybody.
Yes, cause number 6. Rewards and recognitions. Rewards, we think about rewards in a certain way, like the perks or the compensation piece of it. And we should have table stakes hygiene inside of our organizations. And I reflect often on Herzberg's theory of motivation and hygiene, which is this idea of just sort of basic things that we need to make sure we cover. And that is just pay people properly for the time that they work. That's important. We don't even notice it if it's there, if it's neutral. We feel it when it's gone. So that's really important. But it's really about how we recognize and reward people in our organizations. Are we rewarding the same looking people every single time we reward or recognize them? Are we actually advancing people in an equitable way? Are we using like compensation as the reason to recognize and reward someone as a way to beef up, their salary every year? We're just recognizing these same people, not understanding that there's a variety of ways, and also that we need to be able to think as human-centered leaders, what might, and this is a direct manager responsibility, what this person over here, what they think is valuable to them, I don't know what's valuable to them unless I actively listen. It's golden rule 2.0. Don't do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. Do unto others as they would have done unto themselves. And that's really listening, figuring out what's meaningful, taking time to learn what matters to them, and then recognizing them in that nuanced way. And direct managers have a lot of capability to do that, because in their teams, they can handle those kind of very specific ways of recognizing people and showing them that they have value.
And leaders, don't just blame this on senior leadership. We need senior leadership. There's a role for the organization. There's a role that's yours that you can own. And Jennifer's telling you how to do it. Please do it. Carrie calls it the platinum rule. You called it the golden rule 2.0. Call it whatever you want to call it. The point is the same. It's exactly right. Jennifer, I'm going to step back and ask you a question about why is it that you ended up doing this kind of work? Well, tell us very quickly about the journey that led you to this place.
I studied journalism, and I was always a researcher by nature, but it was when I, had a personal experience that made me see how certain people develop the skills of post-traumatic growth, and some people, don't get identified as high performing really early on, like athletes or, like high performing scholars. They kind of get identified really early on, and they get all of this training, psychological fitness training. And so in these times of stress, they rebound in a different way. And so that led me to start up a company with my spouse at the time, and we started up Plasticity Labs based on the concept of neuroplasticity. We wanted to go into organizations and see, does it work like a brain? The more that we, neurally wire the impact of well-being and make it sort of part of the assimilated, structure like a brain, and those patterns actually changed organizations. And then we would measure it against, NPS, ENPS, sales, all those types of important CFO, metrics that matter. But what I came to realize is that we were in a place with people, taking them from sort of good to great and optimizing them, motivating. We were in the Herzberg's motivation space. And I came to understand that a lot of organizations are not addressing the hygiene, the mental health piece. People were sick. They don't, you can't necessarily tell them that it's about gratitude, empathy, mindfulness, breathing and yoga. Those things are great if you are at that place ready for them. But my mission became, how do I deal with this huge amount of people that are not ready for that, and get them to that place where then they are able to accept some of that other part of the process to be well and most, well inside of these organizations.
Don't offer me ice cream when what I need is water right now, right? I got to have the water. I'm not ready for something else. I need something else first. Sorry, that's just what came to my mind, maybe.
No, I love that you said that, Kevin, because actually Herzberg's theory, he was mentored by Maslow. And so when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs inside an organization, it's the same thing. We need those basic needs met before we can have any kind of fulfillment. And so that's my goal, is to say, okay, where are we not meeting basic needs? Because if we don't meet basic needs, it's catastrophic, and that's burnout, right? So we need to get those things met, and then we can start looking at some of those other downstream impacts, which are really great. They're great. I'm not saying don't have that anymore inside your organization. That just can't be the only thing we're using in our wellness strategies.
We have 3 more minutes of Jennifer's time because she has a hard stop. So I have 2 last questions. Question number 1, we all need that hygiene. We all need the self-care. We said it was more than self-care, but what do you do, Jennifer? What do you do for fun? So I'm a nerd. I read all the time. I read fiction. I don't even read my own, nonfiction books. What's the fiction book? There's my other question. What are you reading right now?
So right now I'm reading A Little Life, and it is a really hard novel. I had to actually stop and read a really light book in the middle of it, because by page 450, I was sobbing. So I took a break and went back to it, but it's just a beautiful, book, A Little Life. But I do read constantly. I probably read a book every couple of days.
Jennifer, I know that having been where you are in the week before your book comes out. So first of all, congratulations and thank you for being here. And I know that in this week, things are so busy and so exciting and all of that. And I'm hoping that we can reconnect and we can do a better job of having a real podcast. Are you up for doing that?
Oh, I'd love to. I love talking to you, Kevin. You have great energy. It's always fun.
So we're gonna so everybody that's watching, there'll be a sequel, there'll be a whatever we want to call that. For all of you that are, so Jennifer, if you need to go ahead and go. We love you. The people in the chat are telling you that right now. Great success next week with this book, y'all. I have the ARC. I have the advanced reader copy.
You too.
You're gonna want a copy of this book, so just go put it on your list right now. I'm just telling you that right now. And we'll connect, Jennifer. And for those of you that didn't know what all this has been, go to virtualleadercon.com and come join us. And all the rest of you know that, virtualleadercon.com. It's free. The rest of the day and all day tomorrow for free. If you like this, you're going to continue to love it. And if you know that already, you know where we're going to be. It's time for a break. We're going to see you all at 4:15, quarter after the hour, wherever you live. Jennifer, we'll see you soon. Good luck next week.
Thank you. 5 more days.
Right.
Thanks. Bye.